Hello and welcome to Assemblies of the World with me, Anna Isabel. And I am delighted to welcome Sandra Murphy today. Hello, Sandra.
Oh, hi, Anna. You'll have to excuse me. I've got a bit of a hoarse voice. Excuse the pun.
Bit of a pun because Sandra is an equine nutritional hydrotherapist. So, yes, a bit of a pun, but I think, you are the first guest to be here to talk about our animal friends, and particularly you have specialized in working with horses.
Yeah.
Um, but because of your interest and your speciality in nutrition, I was wondering whether you might be able to talk a little bit about the fact that the life expectancy of animals seems to be decreasing, so that instead of their lives being longer, they are getting shorter, kind of similar to what's happening to the human side of the equation. But I wondered from your perspective with nutrition, whether you might have some ideas about what's going on that could be affecting them adversely.
Yeah. Anna, obviously, I'm an expert in horses, and horses are herbivores, so we're looking at fiber-based diets. And our domesticated horses nowadays are being asked to do things that then they wouldn't normally do in nature. So they are being used in sport and all different disciplines. And so they have to be fed over and above what they would do if they were out grazing, maintenance. So in history, um, we've been feeding horses grain. Uh, Farmers fed horses grain so that they could get up every day and plough 5-acre fields. So they had to replace the glycogen in their muscles to be able to do this job every day, or take the post from London to, Lincoln to York or something overnight at a gallop. They had to replace the glycogen because these horses had to work every day. But this day and age, horses don't work like that anymore. So they don't need to have that level of glycogen in their muscles. They don't need to have that level of grain in their feeds. And so this level of grain that they're traditionally being fed is causing issues with them. And it's causing things like gastric ulcer syndrome, which is a real horrendous condition where the stomach is eroded by the acid that's produced to break down the starch. And it's eroding the stomach away, the top part of the stomach away. And it's causing horrendous issues with ulcers, which has a knock-on effect with behavior. And because of the pain that is caused, um, for instance, if you tighten a girth up, the girth is around the stomach, and that causes pain. If you can imagine, you've got an ulcer in your stomach and you're asked to tighten your belt up 4 or 5 notches and have somebody sit on your back and ask you to jump a jump, you're going to be objecting to that. And so horses then get a really bad reputation of being naughty when in fact they're in pain, you know? And so some of these horses get passed from pillar to post because they're naughty, but they're not, they've got ulcers. And so it's because of the way they're being fed the reason why these ulcers are being these conditions are getting worse. It's epidemic standards now at the minute, epidemic levels of gastric ulcers in horses. I think it's 53% of leisure horses have gastric ulcers. 100% of race horses have gastric ulcers, you know? And so we are causing these issues to happen because we're feeding grain to horses. Now, horses should be fed forage, and forage doesn't get broken down in the stomach. So it doesn't erode, it doesn't cause acid to build in the stomach. So it doesn't cause the erosion in the stomach. Can you see what I mean? So we need to look at ways of providing good fiber-based feeds for horses rather than these grain-based feeds. And the other issue we have is the oils that are being used. Yeah. I mean, some of the oils that are being used now, like for instance, rapeseed oil, these are pro-inflammatory oils. And these are processed oils, highly processed, pro-inflammatory, but they're cheap. Yeah. And they're being utilized in horse feeds, like soya oil as well, rice bran oil. These are all omega-6 type oils, which are pro-inflammatory. So if you've got inflammation there already, it's only going to perpetuate that inflammation. So you're actually creating more inflammation by using these oils. So Mother Nature's oil is omega-3, and omega-3 is anti-inflammatory. So this is where Mother Nature has put her Mother Nature oil in forage, sorry, and forage is what is going to help reduce inflammation.
For those who don't know exactly what is forage,
So forage is non-structural carbohydrates like hay and grass and haylage and all the fibrous materials that horses eat, shrubs and whatever they eat, green fibrous material, herbage.
there's quite a lot that you're talking about, which I have seen experts on dog nutrition and dog behaviorists say. So, for instance, the wonderful work of Sarah Fisher, who actually works as a T-touch, you started as a T-touch practitioner, um, working with horses,
Yeah,
but now is called in as an expert into court cases where dogs are going to be destroyed. And her job is to demonstrate that the dogs are actually in pain, and
yeah,
that's why they are biting,
yeah.
um, aggressive. So, I've seen this. What you're talking about with regard to horses
Mm,
applies, and I'm sure will apply to cats and any other animal, because when we are in pain, and we imagine being in pain and not being able to communicate it,
yes,
somebody is demanding that you do something that you can
yes.
do. And so no wonder there's this issue. So with in the dog world, we have experts like Sarah Fisher who are looking at the way that the dog moves and the posture of the dog,
Mm,
that can then say, do you know what? I think there's an issue here. And you're doing the same thing, talking about the same thing with horses.
yes.
So we do, as keepers of or guardians of animals, need to develop a sensitivity and understanding that our actions could be causing a reaction.
I think Anna, I think you're right because a lot of horse owners nowadays, they don't know the psychology behind horses. They have no understanding. They humanize them, yeah, and they're not human. That they are prey animals. They're not the hunter. They're the hunted, and they have a completely different set of psychology. And the thing about it is, if people keep humanizing our horses, they're just going to make them sicker and sicker and sicker because we need to give them back, put them back to where they should be. Can you see what I'm saying?
I do, and I think that this issue here is, when we're talking about humanizing, it's about expectations that are not species specific. Or
Species specific. Yes.
so, to ask horses to do things that horses don't normally do because it's a human expectation. And we see
Yes.
with dogs as well. Dogs must be allowed to be dogs. Horses must be allowed to be horses. Cats must be allowed to be cats, in the same way that we, particularly those of us in Cabby, want humans to be allowed to be humans. So,
Humans. Yes.
but it's the expectations. And I think because we have become so separated from nature, our our expectations have now become unrealistic. It is
Mm.
unrealistic to think that a dog isn't going to bark. Not all dogs, some dogs are more vocal than others, yes, but I know that my dog is a vocal dog. And and I joke and say free speech for all dogs, but I mean it from the point of view that my dog is going to bark when he hears certain sounds outside the house. That's what he does because he's a dog. And yet there are people out there who are going to give them shocks and have an anti-bark collar to give them a shock every time they bark.
Yeah, terrible,
This
terrible.
this is not a species specific or a species appropriate expectation.
No, no, no. And I get that. And I think horses don't have a voice, because they just do not have a voice. And we are their guardians. We should be looking after them. We should be making sure that they, like you say, they get species specific food as well. Because if you don't give them the right food, they're not going to last. They're not going to live. I had this analogy with lions. If you give a lion a meat feast pizza, oh yeah, it'll eat it. But if you give it to it for 3 months, it'll be dead. Simple. Because it's all the other stuff that's in there, all the other processed stuff, all the things that it shouldn't be having. We've got to start looking at what we're putting in our animals to get the best out of them. It's just like us. If we put rubbish in us, we're going to get rubbish out.
The first time that I came across the issue of omega-6 versus omega-3 was reading about dog nutrition.
Yeah.
And what led me down that path is having a dog with allergies.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's a whole other issue as to why some of our animals, so many of our animals now have allergies where they never did before. That's a whole separate issue. But when I was reading that, I didn't know about the delicate balance that needs to be in terms of the omega-3 ratio to omega-6. And it's happening in dog food, it's happening in human food because of the use, as you say, of seed oils, but they are heavy on omega-6. And one of the things that I was reading was if you are feeding your dogs too much chicken and it's corn-fed chicken, you're not feeding your dog omega-6, but that corn-fed chicken has a high omega-6 element, and your dog is having too much omega-6. That was a huge eye-opener for me because I learned two things about the balance between the two omegas, but I also learned about about the chain, the food chain, how what's at the end of the food chain can affect what's at the other end of the food chain. And it seems obvious now when I think about it, because I knew that if an animal is being fed antibiotics all the time, I don't want to be eating that animal. And so on it goes. So really, I think we do need to be much more acutely aware of what we're putting into our animals' bodies. It's no good just thinking that we just buy them the food and everything will be okay, because actually it's not okay for the human side of the equation either. There are vested interests that are keeping costs down. So we do need to start asking what is in our animals' food.
Well, yeah, I think this is the whole social license to operate thing as well. I'm starting now to stand up for what I believe in, and I believe that we should be standing by our social license to operate. And if there's a way of creating the right species specific food, or if there is the right species specific food out there, we should be looking at doing that. We should be looking at making sure that animals get that, and it shouldn't be on a profit basis just to make money, that we are making money on the suffering of our animals, because it's cheaper to put this oil in, or it makes more commercial sense to be using this, but it's making our animals sick. And it's so sad to see our animals going downhill because of people wanting to make money, and this is not how it should be.
No. And of course, there are people who have different incomes and who might struggle to get some of the better quality food. Now, you're an expert on horse nutrition. So, what is the best way to address this issue within a limited budget?
Well, I mean, I could say, but that would be plugging my feed, which is great. Um, but yeah, forage. I mean, a lot of horses in this country, we do not work our horses hard enough to warrant feeding all these supplements and additives and grain. They, most of them, the majority of them, can live quite happily on the grass that they have. And I know there's a lot of people out there that will say, well, there's some places are deficient in this nutrient, some are deficient in that nutrient. But at the end of the day, that this country is, I would say more often than not, that the grass is okay for horses. There are different issues with, livery yards that have diversified from farmers, and they're using the wrong types of grasses. They're using cow grass, I call it, very high in fructans and very high in nutrients because it's to make milk for cows. And the farmers have diversified to livery yards. And there is issues there, but that's issues of being overweight. You don't want to be feeding grain to horses that are on cow grass, for instance. So there is some variations across the country, but in this country, most horses do not need to be fed a grain feed at all. And if you do need to feed a horse over and above what they need to have, then they need to be now looking at new ways of doing it, like what I've developed, which is the equigel side, the forage side of it. And it gives them high quality omega-3 oil in there as well. So we're getting good quality oil, which replaces the grain, because oil replaces grain for energy. So you don't need to feed the grain, which is causing the erosion in the stomach. You're using oil to create the energy.
Yes, that was something similar. Again, very different species, but there are some strong similarities here, because it would appear that dogs, their energy, their first um, energy source is fat, and
Mm-hmm.
then protein and
Mm-hmm.
lard,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it would seem that it's only dogs that are, in dog races that require a bit more carbohydrate to give them that burst of energy. So again, we have to think about um, this, be more knowledgeable about the species that we're dealing with. So here we have a number of issues. It's the fact that they're eating foods that they don't need to be eating, that are not appropriate. They're not exercising to the extent that um, working horses used to.
Yes.
Um, there and then there's the grass. Would it be true to say, because I was speaking to somebody else about horses for a different subject, but she was talking about how they're it's not just grass that they would want to eat. They might want to nibble on foliage from trees and other things. So would that address the issue of deficiencies?
Yeah, horses are very good. I mean, there is a problem because livery yards don't have the diversification of meadows, for instance. Yeah. So you've got a lot of people that have horses on liveries that have got like one sort of species of grass. There's a hedgerow, and there may be some hedgerows or whatever that they can nibble at. But like, for instance, my horses live on quite a nice old pasture, and there's lots of hedgerows. There's trees. They love willow. Yeah, my horses will always take willow because it's a good, natural painkiller and stuff like that. And they will forage and they will look for different things and they will dig as well. They'll sort of move the earth so they can lick the soil and they'll take in some minerals from the soil, salts and that from the soil. Horses are very resilient. They know what they want. They know what they need. And if there's like, hedgerows or there is trees, they will take it. But you've got to be careful because some trees are poisonous. And, there are there are some issues. I mean, there's so many variations in this when it comes to foraging, you know. So all I can say is that we have to look at all the supplements and stuff that people are buying, that people are making for these horses. I've always said this, if it wasn't around 200 years ago or 100 years ago, it shouldn't be fed because they haven't got the keys to unlock these nutrients in their gut, and it causes issues, you know.
And that goes for us as well. They call
Yeah,
them foods. It's a bit of an issue
yeah,
because
yeah.
we're not designed for that. So it's the
No.
same. So what I'm hearing from you so far is that ideally, what horses need are to be in pasture where there's a variety of grasses that they would enjoy, plus herbs, hedgerows, etc. That's not actually difficult to achieve, is it?
Well, it's not, but it's not achievable for a lot of people. You know, I mean, people buy horses and they go to livery yards. Not all livery yards are set up in in the same way.
But that's what I mean. If the livery yard understood this, they would be in a position to create that environment, which is not that difficult to create. And I think, it's only recently that I've become cognizant of the fact that animals actually do know what herbs to eat and what plants to eat.
Mm,
Uh, there is a term for it, which currently escapes me, but it is the fact. And the first time I heard this was referenced in an interview I was doing with somebody who was not even working with animals, but was quoting studies that had been done that showed that chimpanzees use herbs to self heal. And I thought, oh my word, really? Well, it turns out other species do too.
of course.
Only recently, I was interviewing somebody who also was connected with horses and was talking about how a long time ago we learned about certain herbs by observing horses. So, this is, I think, what I'm wanting to really highlight is how important having the natural environment that they need is, which is exactly what you're wanting to say. So
Mm.
now, one of the you've been talking about these horrendous ulcers that are happening, um, but the other thing that a lot of people will be familiar with is colic. So tell us about colic, what causes it, and then give us the good news, which is how to fix it.
Well, Anna, there's a lot of different types of colic. There's not just one, there's several different types. But the main type of colic is impaction colic. This is the main one that it's one of the second biggest killer of horses in the world, second to old age. So impaction colic is where there's not enough fluid in the digestive system to produce saliva, and the saliva that is needed to break down the fibrous material that goes in. Yeah. And because there's not enough fluid, the fibrous material gets stuck. I don't want to get too technical, but it gets stuck in the tubes because there's a lot of tubes in the digestive system. And there's a certain place called the pelvic flexure, which is quite narrow. And so at that point there is where sometimes you get a blockage. So when you get a blockage, what happens is it can cause gases to actually develop. And it can turn the gut into like the twisty balloons that you make at parties? And it can twist the gut. And if it twists the gut and it blocks off a certain section, that section will die. And so the horse has to go in for surgery. And obviously, with any type of surgery, you've then got inflammation, you've all got all the issues with healing, which then a lot of horses, I think 11% of horses, recolic afterwards because of the inflammation, after colic surgery. So colic is a real bad, it's a killer. It's a killer for horses. And so if we can make sure that we can give the horse enough fluid and rehydrate, then the horse has got enough saliva to allow this fibrous material to pass through. But the problem we've got is you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. This is a saying that's been around for 850 years. And the reason being is because horses are prey animals. And when they're under stress, their physiology shuts them down. And it shuts down certain functions in the body to enable them to run away from whatever's chasing them. And one of those functions is the thirst mechanism. So they stop drinking. So you can take a horse to a show, for instance, and they're under stress and they won't drink at a show. So when they come home and they start to eat hay, that sometimes they colic because they haven't got enough saliva built, fluid in their body to make the saliva to break down the hay. So we need to now look at how we can get horses to drink. And this is the good news. This is why I've developed what I've developed, because I've developed the world's first liquid feed, liquid fiber-based feed that horses take up through palatability, not through the thirst mechanism. Because if they're under stress, like I said, they don't drink, but a horse will always eat. So you can always hand graze a horse and it'll always graze because grass has got 80% water. So they'll always take grass in, but they can't get enough grass in when you're hand grazing to produce enough saliva. Can you see? So I've back engineered grass to allow the dry matter fraction to then be added water added to that to then create a bucket feed. Yeah. So a horse will drink 10 liters in 30 seconds. So if you've got 10 liters of fluid in your horse, it means you've now got enough fluid in the hindgut to be able to produce the saliva. And a horse can never colic, impaction colic on a liquid. Never. It's impossible. So you're always preventing your horse from impaction because you're always going to give it some fluid all the time, and it's attached to soluble fiber into the hindgut. So the horse is hydrated from the hindgut. Now, the problem we've got at the moment is there's a lot of companies out there that are actually making it look like they're drinking. Yeah, because they're using sugar and they're using starch, and the horses are going, oh, this is sweet, I'll drink it. But sugar and starch cannot go into the hindgut. It's impossible. If starch goes past the cecum, the horse will colic. It's called a dietary induced colic because the bacteria can't, it's a starch overload. Bacteria don't break down starch. So all these mashes that are out there that you just add lots of water to, it may look as if your horse is taking fluid in, but it's actually going out the urine straight into your bed. So you're paying a lot of money for sweet food, like a sweet mash that's going in, but it's just getting weed out. It cannot go to the hindgut. And if it doesn't go to the hindgut, you cannot produce the saliva. Can you see? Because it has to be formulated with all the other enzymes to then come out the salivary ducts. So it's, it makes sense that you take a forage feed and you drink it and it takes the forage through to the hindgut. And that's where the water is allowed to release into the body.
And it's fundamental that we understand um, this principle where horses are concerned.
Mm.
And as you say, prey animals, which means they're highly sensitive,
Yeah.
are going to be many situations in which they feel stressed.
Lots. A horse, as soon as it lifts its head from the ground grazing, is under a level of stress. When it's grazing, it's not stressed. But the moment it lifts its head up, the level of stress starts to rise. It may be just looking around because it's seen something and it puts its head back down again, which is very low. But then it could be something running after it and it's got to run. So its levels of stress go up. And people don't realize that when they take these animals to shows or travel them, how many horses 150, 200 years ago got on a flight, a 747 at Heathrow and flew across the world? They didn't. And all of a sudden, we're taking horses all across the world on planes in little crates, and they're under stress. And I don't know if you know this, Anna, that if a horse gets colic, gets an impaction colic on a flight, it gets put to sleep on the flight because it cannot, in a little crate, be thrashing around on a flight with other horses traveling. So they get put to sleep, and it's such a shame because if you gave a horse a bucket of liquid feed before it goes, there's no reason for it to get an impaction.
The issue of horses traveling in conditions that are less than ideal is an old one. I was listening to something only yesterday that was talking about how horses traveled on ships
Yeah,
at the purpose of the First World War.
yeah,
I was pretty shocked, actually. So this is the thing is that again, we are their guardians, and it is up to us to have that understanding. I think most people who have horses in their lives love their horses.
yeah, absolutely.
Most people who have dogs and cats in their life love their dogs and cats. But we lead busy lives. We have the best intentions and not always the best information.
No,
And not only do we not always have the best information, we then have many of us limited budgets. And so we don't always know that the decisions we're making with the best intentions um, may accidentally be harming or in some way impacting our animals in an undesirable way. So, this is why it's so important that we talk to people like you. And
oh,
so, for that reason, I want to say thank you very much
but
for
can I say though, Anna, that I produce what I've produced for you can feed a horse for less than £1.50 a day. You
your.
don't need to spend all this money. And the fact is you're spending so much money on vet bills and things like that when there's no need because we've got a new way of doing things. But unless people start looking into it and researching and seeing how they should be feeding their animals, yeah, and actually taking responsibility for what they're actually feeding their animals and looking on their bags and reading the labels. Yeah, until they start doing that, it's going to be very difficult to try and convince people that they need to be looking at species specific feeds for their animals and not just going for what the feed companies tell them.
I think you're absolutely right. In fact, that's one of the points I was making when I was saying if liveries actually looked at providing a natural environment for the horses,
Mm,
it'd be more cost effective for them
yeah,
and
absolutely.
for the owners of the horses. And I think this
Mm,
is true right across the board. Things look more expensive, but then you wouldn't have, as you put it, the vet bills and all the supplements and everything else that we end up thinking that we need, when actually if we just go back to the basics,
back to basics.
then
Yeah.
things to be as complicated and expensive as they have become. And yes, I my next question to you was, how do people find you and your wonderful feed?
So basically, I don't just do the feed, I do training and education as well. It's called the Equine Nutritional Hydrotherapy Assessment. I do a course that people can join and I can help teach them as well. And it's really interesting because a lot of people are very keen to understand how horses should be fed. And I'm very keen to help them understand the right way of doing things. And so, yeah, they can find me on my website, www.equidiet.org.uk. You can go on there and you can find everything about the feed. They can find about equine nutritional hydrotherapy and how it works. And you can book on a course. There's so much you can do. And I'm so willing to help people understand because I want to see horses healthy. I want to see them hydrated and I want to see them happy, you know? And then when you've got a healthy, happy, hydrated horse, you've got a really good companion. They love you for it, you know. So we are custodians of these animals, and we need to make sure that we look after them the way that they're supposed to be looked after. And I'm here to help anyone that wants to.
Perfect. Thank you again. I feel I ought to say goodbye to you, given that your voice is beginning to disappear again.
Yeah, sorry.
No, no, not at all. But I just want to thank you. My gratitude is even greater knowing that you've not been well, and here you are, um,
Oh,
giving your time and explaining to us how things are with our beautiful horses. Thank you again, and well, it's
can I just say mention the name again? It's Equigel. So if you want to look it up on YouTube or you want to look it up on Google, it's Equigel. And I also do hydrocane for dogs, and it's based on chicken liver. So it's really, really good for them. It's not got no additives, no nothing. It's great, and they love it.
I bet they do.
They do.
What I was going to add is that I'll be putting a link to your website in the
Thank
description.
you.
Thank you so much for your time again.
Thank you, Anna. Take care. It's nice to speak to you.
And thank you all for watching. Until next time, goodbye.
Bye bye.